In a desperate gambit for survival, a scrawny human technician races through the crumbling bowels of a crippled alien warship to rescue a Breen child. The immense battleship Golorax drifts powerless in the void, ravaged by a devastating human attack. Alarms wail and bulkheads groan as the monstrous vessel shudders in its death throes. Amidst the chaos, the panicked Breen crew abandons ship, unwittingly leaving behind a terrified 6-year-old girl named Alara. She huddles alone in a pitch-black corridor, trembling as the only world she's ever known disintegrates around her. But Alara is not as alone as she believes. A handful of human maintenance workers, stranded aboard the doomed Golorax, scour the eerily silent decks for survivors. Among them is Benjamin Cooper, a pint-sized but quick-witted technician. As he navigates the twisting passages, Benjamin stumbles upon the cowering Alara. Shock ripples through him at the sight of a mere child, abandoned to a grim fate. Though Alara initially recoils from the diminutive human, Benjamin persists, his gentle coaxing and solemn promise of protection gradually winning her trust. Escaping the failing ship, however, will push both of them to their limits. With each passing minute, life support systems wink out, the vessel's AI descends into mad glitches, and ruthless Breen guards still roam the corridors, hell-bent on exterminating the human vermin. For young Alara, the unassuming Benjamin is her sole lifeline, while for Benjamin, safeguarding the innocent girl is now his driving purpose. As the unlikely duo embarks on a harrowing odyssey through the labyrinthine battleship, an unbreakable bond takes root, one that transcends species, size, and long-held prejudices. The challenges ahead will forge their unity and give Benjamin the chance to prove that even the smallest human can reshape the destiny of empires. With doom nipping at their heels and time bleeding away, Benjamin's unwavering resolve and Alara's budding trust may just be the key to not only their own survival, but to rewriting the future of human-Breen relations. In this pivotal moment, one tiny human will show that true heroism knows no bounds. Benjamin's heart pounded as he led Alara through the shadowy passages of the dying Golorax. The ship groaned around them, a mournful sound punctuated by the erratic flicker of emergency lights. A sudden realization struck the human technician. The life support systems were deteriorating much faster than he had anticipated. Time was running out. Spotting a nearby control room, Benjamin ushered Alara inside. His agile fingers flew over the alien panels, his face a mask of concentration as he fought to stabilize the ship's critical functions. Alara watched in awe as the diminutive human worked feverishly, battling against the ship's failing systems. With a triumphant cry, Benjamin managed to restore partial power and life support. The ship's groans quieted and the lights steadied. But their victory was short-lived. An alarm blared, warning of a security breach. Benjamin's actions had inadvertently alerted the remaining Breen guards to their presence. As they raced through the labyrinthine corridors, a hulking figure emerged from the shadows. Krax, a massive Breen soldier, snarled at the sight of Benjamin, his reptilian features contorted with disgust. "Human vermin," Krax spat, lunging at the technician with murderous intent. Benjamin reacted instinctively, evading Krax's powerful blows with surprising agility. He lured the enraged Breen into a narrow maintenance shaft, where Krax's bulk became a liability. Seizing his chance, Benjamin sabotaged a power conduit, unleashing a blinding electrical surge that sent Krax crumpling to the floor, unconscious. Alara emerged from her hiding spot, staring at Benjamin with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The tiny human had fearlessly protected her from one of her own kind, displaying a level of courage she had never witnessed before. As they pressed deeper into the crippled ship, the dangers mounted. Explosive decompression tore through sections of the hull, while plasma fires raged unchecked. Benjamin's quick thinking and resourcefulness saw them through each crisis, shielding Alara from harm at every turn. Through the harrowing journey, a bond began to form between the unlikely pair. Alara's fear and reservation towards Benjamin slowly melted away, replaced by a growing trust and appreciation for his bravery. Benjamin, in turn, remained patient and understanding, comforting the young Breen with stories of Earth and the indomitable human spirit. But their progress was suddenly halted by the appearance of a heavily armed Breen patrol, led by the ruthless commander Zoltar. Shock and rage twisted Zoltar's features as he spotted the human intruder. "Kill the human!" he roared, and energy bolts filled the air. Benjamin grabbed Alara's hand, pulling her into a desperate sprint as the Breen opened fire. Alarms shrieked and bulkheads exploded around them, the ship's deterioration accelerating with each passing moment. As they fled deeper into the dying vessel, Benjamin knew their chances of escape had just drastically diminished. With Zoltar and his soldiers in relentless pursuit, the path ahead was fraught with peril. But the technician's tenacity only hardened. He had made a promise to protect Alara, and he would keep it, regardless of the cost. The once tiny human and the young Breen girl, forged together by fate, now faced their greatest trial yet. In the heart of a crumbling alien battleship, pursued by hostile soldiers and besieged by failing systems, they would have to rely on each other more than ever to survive. The bond between them, born of shared danger and mutual reliance, would be tested to its limits. Energy bolts sizzled past as Benjamin and Alara raced onwards, plunging deeper into the labyrinthine ship. The tiny human technician, once underestimated by all, now held the fate of an innocent child, and perhaps the future of two species, in his quick-thinking hands. With doom nipping at their heels and time bleeding away, Benjamin prepared to face the gauntlet ahead, his unwavering tenacity matched only by the trust shining in Alara's eyes. Benjamin's heart raced as he yanked Alara into the cavernous cargo hold, the thunderous footsteps of Zoltar and his troops echoing close behind. The door hissed shut, and Benjamin frantically scanned the dimly lit space for an escape route. His eyes locked onto a battered escape pod nestled in the corner. "There," he whispered, guiding Alara towards it. The pod's hull was scorched, its systems dark. Benjamin's fingers flew over the damaged control panel, coaxing life back into the dormant circuitry. Alara watched, wide-eyed, as the tiny human worked his magic. A muffled explosion rocked the ship. The cargo hold door groaned under the assault of Breen weapons. Benjamin knew they had mere moments left. With a final spark, the escape pod hummed to life. Benjamin's face fell as he studied the readouts. "It'll only support one passenger," he muttered. Alara's antenna drooped. "But—" Benjamin silenced her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're going?" he said firmly, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his insides. He pressed a small data drive into her hand. "Take this. It's got information about Breen plans. It could change everything." Tears welled in Alara's eyes as Benjamin quickly explained the pod's controls. The cargo hold door buckled inward with a screech of tortured metal. "Go," Benjamin urged, helping Alara into the cramped pod. As the hatch sealed, Benjamin locked eyes with the young Breen girl. In that moment, a lifetime of understanding passed between them. Benjamin sprinted to a nearby power junction, his hands a blur as he overloaded the system. The resulting explosion sent shockwaves through the ship, buying precious seconds as the Breen soldiers stumbled. Through the chaos, Benjamin watched the escape pod streak away from the dying Golarax. A bittersweet smile crossed his face before he steeled himself for what was to come. Zoltar burst into the cargo hold, his troops fanning out behind him. "Where is the girl?" he snarled. Benjamin said nothing, darting through a maintenance hatch. He led the Breen on a desperate chase through the bowels of the ship, using every trick and shortcut he knew to stay ahead. The human technician found himself in the sprawling engine room, a labyrinth of hissing pipes and crackling energy conduits. He ducked behind a massive coolant tank as plasma bolts sizzled past. "Come out, human vermin!" Zoltar bellowed. "Your death will be swift." Benjamin's mind raced. He spotted the ship's primary power core, pulsing with awe-inspiring energy. A plan formed, born of desperation and technical know-how. He emerged from cover, dodging Breen fire as he sprinted towards the core. His fingers danced across the control interface, initiating a catastrophic overload. Alarms blared as the ship shuddered violently. Zoltar realized the danger too late. "Stop him!" he roared. But Benjamin was already moving, leading the Breen deeper into the maze of unstable conduits. A stray bolt caught him in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Zoltar loomed over him, energy weapon raised triumphantly. Benjamin kicked out, catching the Breen commander's knee. As Zoltar stumbled, Benjamin rolled to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder. The two opponents circled each other, human agility versus Breen strength. Benjamin feinted left, then dove right, using his smaller size to slip past Zoltar's guard. He slammed his palm against a nearby control panel, sealing off a section of the engine room. Zoltar roared in fury as he found himself trapped, separated from his troops by a shimmering force field. Benjamin staggered towards the last remaining escape pod, every step in agony. Behind him, the Golarax groaned its death throes as the power core reached critical mass. He collapsed into the pod, vision blurring as he initiated the launch sequence. The last thing Benjamin saw before losing consciousness was the titanic explosion that consumed the Breen warship. Darkness claimed him, but even in unconsciousness, Benjamin clutched tightly to the data drive that held the key to changing the course of two civilizations. Benjamin's eyes fluttered open, greeted by the sterile white ceiling of a medical bay. His body ached, each breath a reminder of his harrowing escape. As his vision cleared, he found himself surrounded by concerned human faces. "Welcome back, hero," a gruff voice said. Captain Hawkins, leader of the search and rescue team, stood at the foot of Benjamin's bed. "You're lucky we picked up your pod's distress beacon. The Golarax—" "Destroyed," Benjamin finished, his voice hoarse. He struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "Alara, the Breen girl, did you find her?" Hawkins shook his head. "No other survivors. I'm sorry, son." Benjamin's chest tightened, grief threatening to overwhelm him. He had saved her, hadn't he? The memory of Alara's wide eyes as the escape pod sealed haunted him. Days turned to weeks as Benjamin recovered, hailed as a hero for his actions aboard the Golarax. But the praise felt hollow, his thoughts constantly drifting to Alara's fate. Then came the news that shook the galaxy. Benjamin stood transfixed before a holoscreen, watching grainy footage of a young Breen addressing the High Council. His heart leapt. It was Alara. She spoke with a passion that belied her years, presenting damning evidence from the data drive. Commander Zoltar's treachery was laid bare, his plans to manipulate the Breen into an unnecessary war exposed. The revelation sent shockwaves through Breen society. Reports flooded in of pitched battles between loyalist forces and Zoltar's supporters. The Breen homeworld descended into chaos. Benjamin paced his quarters, torn between relief at Alara's survival and fear for her safety. When the summons came, he didn't hesitate. Admiral Chen's office buzzed with activity as Benjamin entered. The grizzled officer fixed him with the intense look. "Cooper, we have a situation. Your Breen friend has taken control of a rebel faction, but Zoltar's closing in. We're sending in an extraction team. You in?" Benjamin's response was immediate. "When do we leave?" The Breen capital was a war zone. Benjamin's team moved swiftly through rubble-strewn streets, dodging energy blasts and skirting pockets of intense fighting. Intel placed Alara's stronghold in the old government district, but getting there proved treacherous. A massive explosion rocked a nearby building. Through the settling dust, a hulking figure emerged. Benjamin's blood ran cold as he recognized the scarred visage of Krax, the Breen guard from the Golarax. "Take cover!" Benjamin shouted, diving behind a crash skimmer as Krax opened fire. The Breen's eyes gleamed with murderous recognition. "I remember you, tiny human," Krax snarled. "Zoltar sends his regards." Benjamin's team returned fire, but Krax seemed unstoppable, shrugging off hits that would have felled a lesser being. They needed a diversion. "Keep him busy," Benjamin called out, slipping away as his comrades maintained suppressing fire. He circled behind Krax, using the broken cityscape for cover. With a deep breath, Benjamin sprinted forward, hurling a plasma grenade at Krax's feet. The explosion sent Krax stumbling. Before the Breen could recover, Benjamin's team concentrated their fire. Krax roared in pain and fury, forced to retreat. "We need to move," Benjamin urged. "He'll be back with reinforcements." They pressed on, the sounds of battle growing louder as they neared Alara's position. Benjamin's heart raced, not just from exertion, but from the prospect of seeing her again. A familiar voice crackled over their comm units. Unknown forces, identify yourselves. Benjamin's breath caught in his throat. Alara, it's me, Benjamin. We're here to get you out. A moment of stunned silence, then, Benjamin, you're alive. But how? No time to explain, Benjamin cut in. Zoltar's forces are closing in. We need to evacuate now. Negative, Alara replied, her voice firm. We can't abandon our position. The data we've gathered could turn the tide of this war. Benjamin exchanged worried glances with his team. They had come to extract Alara, not fight a pitched battle, but he knew they couldn't leave her behind. We're coming in, Benjamin decided. Hold tight. As they approached Alara's stronghold, the sky lit up with anti-aircraft fire. Zoltar's assault had begun in earnest. Benjamin gripped his weapon tighter, steeling himself for the fight ahead. They had come too far to fail now. The reunited duo would soon face their greatest challenge yet, with the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance. Benjamin's team fought their way through the crumbling streets, dodging energy blasts and debris as they approached Alara's stronghold. The young Breen's voice crackled over the comm once more. Benjamin, we're pinned down. Zoltar's forces are breaching our defenses. Hold on, we're almost there, Benjamin shouted, gesturing for his squad to pick up the pace. They rounded a corner to find Alara's rebels engaged in a fierce firefight. Benjamin's heart leapt as he caught sight of her, her antennae twitching with concentration as she directed her troops. Alara, he called out. She turned, her eyes widening in recognition. Benjamin! She rushed to meet him, narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma bolts. I can't believe you're here. He gripped her shoulders, scanning her for injuries. We need to get you out of here. Zoltar's bringing in reinforcements. Alara shook her head, her expression hardening. Not without the data. It's too important. A nearby explosion showered them with debris. Benjamin nodded grimly. All right, but we move fast. Where is it? As Alara led him to a makeshift command center, Benjamin's mind raced. They'd come to extract her, not wage a full-scale battle, but he couldn't abandon her cause now. Team, new objective, he barked into his comm. We're securing rebel intel before evac. Set up a defensive perimeter. The next hours passed in a blur of smoke and plasma fire. Benjamin's soldiers, though outnumbered, held their ground with fierce perseverance. He utilized every scrap of knowledge about Breen infrastructure, turning the very city against Zoltar's forces. Power conduits overloaded at precisely timed intervals, cutting off enemy advances. Sewer systems became deadly traps, funneling Zoltar's troops into brutal ambushes. Benjamin's smaller team ran circles around the lumbering Breen soldiers, striking hard and fading away before retaliation could land. But even as they whittled down Zoltar's numbers, Benjamin knew it couldn't last. The comm chatter grew increasingly frantic as Zoltar's reinforcements arrived, threatening to overwhelm their position. Benjamin! Alara's voice cut through the chaos. We've secured the data, but we're cut off from the extraction point. Benjamin's heart raced as he surveyed their dwindling options. Fall back to the central plaza, he ordered. We'll make our stand there. As his beleaguered troops regrouped, Benjamin prepared for what seemed an inevitable defeat. He turned to Alara, her eyes reflecting the same grim realization. Whatever happens, he said softly, I'm glad I found you again. Alara opened her mouth to respond when a deafening roar filled the air. For a moment, Benjamin feared Zoltar had brought in heavy artillery. Then he saw Alara's face light up with incredulous joy. It's our fighters, she cried. They've regrouped. A swarm of Breen vessels swept low over the city, raining fire upon Zoltar's forces. Benjamin watched in awe as Alara's rebel fighters poured from the ships, catching the enemy in a devastating crossfire. Come on! Alara tugged at his arm, her eyes blazing with newfound hope. We can win this! As they charged back into the fray, Benjamin allowed himself a moment of optimism. Perhaps they stood a chance after all. But the battle was a long way to go. As they pushed forward, a massive figure emerged from the smoke. Benjamin's blood ran cold as he recognized the scarred visage of Cracks. The Breen guard's eyes locked onto Benjamin, filled with murderous rage. Tiny human, he snarled. Your luck ends here. Benjamin barely had time to shove Alara clear before Krax was upon him, his massive fist swinging with brutal force. The human technician ducked and weaved, his smaller size now an advantage in the rubble-strewn battlefield. As they fought, Benjamin caught glimpses of Alara engaged in her own desperate struggle. She faced off against Zoltar himself, the treacherous commander's energy blade clashing against her improvised staff. Benjamin's heart clenched with worry, but he couldn't spare the focus. Krax pressed his attack relentlessly, each blow threatening to end the fight in an instant. "You cost me everything!" Krax roared, swinging a piece of debris like a club. "The Golarax, my rank, my honor!" Benjamin rolled clear, his mind racing. He needed to end this quickly if he hoped to help Alara. His eyes darted around the battlefield, searching for an advantage. There, a damaged plasma conduit, its energy terrifying. If he could just lure Krax close enough. Benjamin allowed himself a grim smile as he faced his hulking opponent. "Come on, then," he taunted. "Let's finish this." With a bellow of rage, Krax charged forward. Benjamin stood his ground, waiting until the last possible moment before diving aside. Krax's momentum carried him directly into the weakened conduit. The resulting explosion sent the Breen guard flying. He crashed to the ground, his armor smoking and sparking. Benjamin approached cautiously, but Krax didn't rise. A scream of fury drew his attention. Zoltar, realizing the battle was lost, had broken away from Alara. The commander raced towards a nearby building, his intentions unclear but undoubtedly sinister. "Stop him!" Alara shouted, struggling to her feet. "He's heading for the fusion reactor." Benjamin's blood ran cold as he realized Zoltar's plan. If he overloaded the reactor, it would take out half the city and everyone in it. Without hesitation, Benjamin sprinted after the Breen commander, Alara close on his heels. As they entered the reactor complex, alarms blared warnings of an imminent catastrophe. Benjamin's mind raced as he assessed the situation. There might be a way to contain the overload, but it would require someone to manually vent the core, someone who would have no chance of escape. He turned to Alara, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had to do. "Do." He met Alara's gaze, seeing the realization dawn in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "There has to be another way." Benjamin shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "You know there isn't. Get everyone out. I'll handle this." Alara gripped his arm fiercely. "I won't leave you." "You have to," Benjamin insisted. "Your people need you. The truth about Zoltar, the data. It all dies here if you don't make it out." Tears welled in Alara's eyes as she struggled with the impossible choice before her. With a choked sob, she pulled Benjamin into a fierce embrace. "I won't forget you," she promised. Benjamin held her tightly for a moment before gently pushing her away. "Go," he urged. "There's not much time." As Alara reluctantly retreated, Benjamin turned to face the reactor. His hands flew over the controls, initiating the manual venting sequence. Alarms blared as superheated plasma began to vent into the chamber. Benjamin worked feverishly, sweat pouring down his face as the temperature rose to unbearable levels. His skin blistered, his lungs burned, but still he pushed on. As consciousness began to fade, his last thoughts were of Alara and the future he hoped his sacrifice would secure. The years that followed saw Alara rise to prominence among the Breen. She leveraged the influence of her rebel faction, using Benjamin's sacrifice as a rallying cry for change. Through tireless effort and skilled diplomacy, she brokered an historic accord between the Breen and humans. On the day the treaty was signed, Alara stood before a sea of faces, Breen and human alike. "Today we honor those who gave everything so that we might forge a new path," she declared, her voice strong despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "We build this future not just for ourselves, but for them." The era of unity that followed brought unprecedented progress to both species. Joint colonies flourished, technological advances accelerated, and long-standing prejudices began to crumble. But even as Alara's vision took root, a new threat emerged from the shadows. The attack came without warning. Alara was in her office when the first reports flooded in. A joint human Breen colony on the outskirts of Breen space had been hit. Hard. Casualties? Ilara demanded, her antenna twitching with barely controlled fury. Her aide's voice was grim. Heavy. Preliminary reports suggest over 1,000 dead, both Breen and human. Ilara's fists clenched. Who's responsible? A hardline splinter group, the aide replied, led by Sorvix. The name sent a chill through Ilara. Sorvix, father of Cracks, the Breen guard who had nearly killed Benjamin aboard the Golarax. She had hoped the old hatreds had died with Zoltar, but it seemed some wounds ran too deep. As reports of the attack spread, Ilara found herself besieged by demands for retaliation. The fragile peace she had worked so hard to build threatened to unravel. In a secure chamber deep beneath the Breen capital, Ilara addressed a joint council of human and Breen leaders. Diplomacy alone cannot sway Sorvix, she declared. We must act decisively before he can launch a full-scale war. A grizzled human admiral leaned forward. What do you propose? Ilara's eyes glinted with willpower. A surgical strike. We hit Sorvix's stronghold hard and fast, before he can do more damage. The room erupted in heated debate. It was the human ambassador who finally spoke up in support of Ilara's plan. We stand with our Breen allies, she declared. Let's end this threat together. Within days, a strike team was assembled. Ilara insisted on leading the mission herself, despite the protests of her advisors. As she donned her combat gear, she caught sight of her reflection. The young girl who had escaped the Golarax was long gone, replaced by a battle-hardened leader. The team deployed under cover of darkness, their ship cutting silently through the toxic atmosphere of the Breen wastelands. As they approached Sorvix's hidden fortress, Ilara felt Benjamin's presence more strongly than ever. His courage, his grit, it all lived on in her. We go in quiet, Ilara instructed as they touched down. Neutralize the guards, secure Sorvix. We end this tonight. The fortress loomed before them, a jagged silhouette against the roiling sky. Ilara took a deep breath, steeling herself for the battle ahead. Whatever happened, she would not let Benjamin's sacrifice be in vain. With a silent signal, the strike team moved out, melting into the shadows of the alien landscape. The final confrontation with Sorvix awaited, and with it, the fate of two worlds hung in the balance. The years that followed saw Ilara's vision of unity flourish beyond her wildest hopes. Human Breen colonies dotted the stars, their inhabitants working side by side to unlock the secrets of the cosmos. On Kyrios, the coalition capital world, towering spires of alien alloys stretched towards the sky, a testament to what their species could achieve together. Ilara stood at the viewport of her office, gazing out at the bustling metropolis below. A ghost of a smile played on her lips as she remembered Benjamin. He would have loved to see this. A sudden tremor shook the building, shattering her reverie. Alarms blared as the lights flickered and died. What's happening? Ilara demanded, activating her emergency comm. Multiple explosions across the power grid. Her aide's panicked voice crackled through. We're losing systems citywide. Ilara's antenna twitched as her mind raced. This was no accident. Lock down the command hub, she ordered, and get me a direct line to... The transmission cut off abruptly. In the eerie silence that followed, Ilara heard the telltale whine of Breen energy weapons. Ilara! A human lieutenant burst into her office, plasma rifle at the ready. We're under attack. Rebel forces led by General Thosin. Ilara's blood ran cold. Thosin, the embodiment of everything she'd fought against. She should have seen this coming. How bad? She asked, already moving to retrieve her own weapon. Bad, the lieutenant replied grimly. They've seized the main power relay. Communications are down. We're cut off. Ilara nodded, her teeth clenched. Then we fight. We hold the command hub at all costs. The next hours passed in a blur of plasma fire and acrid smoke. Ilara coordinated her loyalists in a desperate defense, utilizing every scrap of tactical knowledge she'd gleaned over the years. As they fought, Ilara caught snippets of intel from captured enemies. Thosin's forces had launched a full-scale assault, intent on seizing control of Kyrios. We need reinforcements, Ilara muttered, ducking behind a barricade as energy bolts seared the air above her. She turned to her communications officer. Can we get a message out? The young Breen shook his head. Not with the main relay down, but if I can reach the auxiliary transmitter on the East Tower. Ilara nodded. Do it. Take a squad and get that message sent. As her troops held the line, Ilara's mind raced. They needed to retake critical infrastructure, turn the tide of this battle. She pulled up schematics of Kyrios on her datapad, searching for weaknesses they could exploit. A plan began to form. If they could use the maintenance tunnels to outflank Thosin's forces. A familiar voice crackled over the comm. This is Commander Taylor of the Earth Alliance. We've received your distress call and are inbound. ETA 30 minutes. Hope surged through Ilara. If they could just hold out until Taylor's forces arrived. New plan, she announced to her troops. We're going on the offensive. Ilara led a daring counterattack, utilizing guerrilla tactics honed during her days as a rebel. They moved through service corridors and abandoned buildings, striking hard and fading away before Thosin's forces could retaliate. As they pushed towards the central plaza, Ilara found herself face-to-face with Thosin himself. The Breen general's eyes blazed with hatred as he leveled his weapon at her. Your dream of unity dies here, he snarled. Ilara raised her own pistol, her voice steady. No, your hatred dies here. They clashed in a brutal exchange of fire and hand-to-hand combat. Thosin was a seasoned warrior, his blows threatening to overwhelm Ilara at every turn. But she refused to yield, driven by the memory of Benjamin and everything they'd fought for. Just as Thosin pinned her against a wall, his fist raised for a killing blow, a deafening roar filled the air. Commander Taylor's ship swept low over the city, their weapons blazing. Thosin's eyes widened in shock. In that moment of distraction, Ilara struck. She drove her knee into his midsection and wrenched his weapon away. It's over, she declared, aiming the pistol at his head. Thosin's face contorted with rage. Never, he spat, reaching for a device on his belt. Ilara fired, but not before Thosin activated the detonator. A series of explosions rocked the city, and alarms began to blare from the direction of the reactor complex. What have you done? Ilara demanded, hauling Thosin to his feet. The Breen general laughed mirthlessly. If I can't have Kyrios, no one will. As Commander Taylor's forces secured the area, Ilara raced towards the reactor. The situation was grim, containment was failing, and a catastrophic meltdown loomed. Ilara's mind flashed back to that fateful day on the Breen homeworld, to Benjamin's sacrifice. She knew what had to be done. But as she prepared to enter the reactor chamber, a hand gripped her arm. She turned to see Commander Taylor, his face set with iron will. Not alone, he said simply. Ilara nodded, a lump forming in her throat. Together, they stepped into the inferno, ready to face whatever came next. Ilara and Taylor stood at the threshold of the reactor chamber, the heat searing their faces even through protective gear. Alarms blared, warning of imminent meltdown. I won't do it, Ilara said, her voice firm despite the chaos around them. We find another way. Taylor nodded, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. Together, then. What's the plan? Ilara's mind raced, analyzing schematics and systems. We divide into teams, hit multiple venting points simultaneously. They sprinted through the complex, gathering human and Breen soldiers alike. Ilara quickly outlined her strategy, assigning strike teams to critical junctions. As they pushed deeper into the facility, pockets of Thosin's loyalists emerged from hiding. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, forcing Ilara's team to take cover behind bulkheads. Push forward, she shouted over the din of battle. We can't let them delay us. They fought their way through, Taylor's Earth Alliance troops working in seamless coordination with Breen defenders. It was everything Ilara had envisioned for their alliance, forged in the crucible of crisis. Rounding a corner, Ilara came face to face with Thosin himself. The general's eyes blazed with hatred as he raised his weapon. This ends now, he snarled, firing a barrage of energy bolts. Ilara dove and rolled, returning fire. They clashed in a brutal duel, Thosin's raw power matched against Ilara's speed and cunning. She feinted left, then struck with lightning precision, knocking Thosin's weapon away. With a final decisive blow, Ilara subdued the rebel leader. It's over, Thosin. Your rebellion dies here. Leaving him restrained for her security teams, Ilara pressed on. Time was running out. She rejoined Taylor at the main control hub. Sweat poured down their faces as they worked feverishly, coordinating the venting efforts of their scattered teams. "It's working!" Taylor exclaimed as pressure readings began to stabilize. "But we've still got massive buildup in sectors 7 through 9. Ilara's eyes narrowed as she studied the readouts. "The primary vents are fused shut. We'll have to do it manually." She turned to the assembled engineers, human and Breen alike. "I need volunteers for an extreme risk operation." Without hesitation, a mixed group stepped forward. Ilara nodded grimly. "Let's move." They raced to the central vent chamber, the air growing thick with radioactive particles. One by one, they attacked the massive valves, straining against unyielding metal. The radiation took its toll swiftly. Engineers collapsed, their protective suits offering little defense against the intense bombardment. Ilara felt her own strength fading as she wrestled with the final valve. Her vision blurred, muscles screaming in protest. But she refused to yield. Just as the last vent opened, a deafening explosion rocked the facility. Ilara's comm crackled to life, Taylor's voice urgent in her ear. "Ilara, we've got a new problem. Sorvix has escaped and taken hostages in the command center. He's threatening to sabotage everything unless we meet his demands." Ilara's heart sank. They were so close but now faced a new crisis. She looked at her remaining team, seeing the same dogged persistence in their eyes. "We hold the line here," she declared. "Taylor, do whatever it takes to stop Sorvix. We'll keep these vents cycling as long as we can." As Taylor mobilized his forces, Ilara and her dwindling crew fought against time and their own failing bodies. One by one, they succumbed to the radiation, leaving Ilara alone at the controls. Her hands shook as she manipulated the valves, each motion sending waves of agony through her body. But she refused to give in, the memory of Benjamin's sacrifice driving her forward. Through half-lidded eyes, she saw the readouts slowly stabilizing. They were so close. A thunderous crash echoed through the chamber. Ilara turned to see a wall of superheated debris sealing off the exit. She was trapped. Her comm crackled once more, Taylor's voice barely audible through the static. "Ilara, we've neutralized Sorvix, but you're cut off. We can't reach you in time." Ilara's mind raced, seeking a solution even as her body failed her. "The transport tunnels," she gasped. "Redirect. The venting." She heard Taylor barking orders, mobilizing his team for one last bold strategy. As darkness crept into the edges of her vision, Ilara clung to hope. The Alliance would survive. Their dream would live on. With trembling fingers, she entered the final command sequence, praying it would be enough. Ilara's fingers trembled as she entered the final command sequence. The world around her blurred, darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. She slumped against the console, her body racked with pain from the intense radiation exposure. Suddenly, her comm crackled to life. Taylor's voice cut through the static, barely audible over the rumble of failing machinery. "Ilara, we've got a plan. Hold on." She forced her eyes open, struggling to focus on the flickering readouts before her. "I'm listening," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Taylor's words came in bursts, explaining their desperate strategy to vent the reactor's volatile energies through the abandoned transport tunnels. As he spoke, Ilara's mind raced, recalling the intricate network beneath Kyrios. "The old maintenance shafts," she gasped. "Section 42B, it's your best access point." She heard Taylor barking orders, mobilizing his forces. Ilara summoned every ounce of strength left in her radiation-ravaged body, determined to guide them through the treacherous maze below. In the tunnels, human engineers and Breen warriors moved as one, their path illuminated only by the harsh glow of emergency lamps. Captain Voss, a grizzled Earth Alliance veteran, led the venting team through the cramped passageways. Left at the next junction, Ilara's faint voice guided them through their comms. "Watch for structural weaknesses in the eastern corridor." Voss signaled his team forward, plasma rifle at the ready. They'd barely cleared the junction when a barrage of energy bolts screamed past them, impacting the crumbling walls. "Contact!" Voss shouted, diving for cover. "Sorvix's rebels, dead ahead!" The tunnel erupted in chaos as both sides exchanged fire. Acrid smoke filled the air, visibility reduced to mere meters. A young Breen engineer beside Voss took a direct hit, his body crumpling to the ground. "We can't afford delays," Voss growled. He primed a stun grenade, hurling it towards the enemy position. The concussive blast reverberated through the tunnel, momentarily silencing the rebel fire. "Push through," Voss ordered. His team surged forward, overwhelming the dazed rebels in close-quarters combat. As they secured the area, Ilara's voice crackled over the comm once more. "You're approaching the first venting junction. Hurry." Above ground, Commander Taylor coordinated the defense of key access points. Plasma bolts seared the air as his troops repelled waves of Sorvix's fanatics. "Hold the line!" Taylor roared, returning fire from behind a makeshift barricade. "We can't let them reach those hatches." In the reactor chamber, Ilara fought to stay conscious. Each word she transmitted to the tunnel teams sent waves of agony through her body. But she refused to yield, knowing her guidance was their only lifeline in the pitch-black labyrinth below. Captain Voss and his team raced through the winding passages, Ilara's increasingly faint transmissions their sole beacon. They arrived at a massive venting apparatus, its ancient mechanisms covered in layers of grime. "We're at the first junction," Voss reported, beginning priming sequence. As his engineers worked feverishly to activate the long-dormant systems, a distant rumble shook the tunnel. Voss's comm crackled to life, Taylor's voice urgent in his ear. "Secondary containment ring just failed. We're running out of time." Voss gritted his teeth, willing his team to work faster. The ancient machinery groaned to life, conduits pulsing with barely contained energy. "First junction primed," he reported, moving to the next. They pressed on, guided by Ilara's faltering voice. In one heart-stopping moment, a tunnel section ahead of them collapsed, blocking their path with a wall of debris. "No time to find another route," Voss muttered. He turned to the Breen warriors in his team. "We need to clear this, now." Without hesitation, the Breen stepped forward. Using their superior strength and specialized equipment, they attacked the rubble with stubborn persistence. Voss and his human engineers provided cover, fending off sporadic attacks from the few remaining rebels. As the last of the debris was cleared, Ilara's voice came through once more, barely audible. "You're almost there. The central hub is just ahead." Voss led his team forward, emerging into a vast chamber. Banks of archaic machinery lined the walls, conduits snaking across the ceiling. But it was the sight at the center of the room that made Voss's blood run cold. A wall of superheated debris sealed off one section of the chamber. Beyond it, barely visible through the shimmer of intense heat, lay Ilara's motionless form. "We've reached the central hub," Voss reported, his voice tight. "But Ilara's trapped. We can't reach her." There was a moment of tense silence before Taylor's voice came through. "We need to trigger an overload. It's the only way to vent the remaining energy." Voss's eyes widened as he realized the implications. "Sir, the blast could kill her." "It's our only option," Taylor replied grimly. "Get your best engineers on those calculations. We need to vent through the vertical access shaft with pinpoint precision." As Voss's team scrambled to work, the very foundations of Kyrios trembled. The reactor's instability was accelerating, pushing towards catastrophic failure. In the sealed-off section, Ilara stirred feebly. Through blurred vision, she saw the frantic activity beyond the barrier of debris. A ghost of a smile played on her lips as she realized the true meaning of unity, humans and Breen, working as one to save both their peoples. With the last of her strength, she keyed her comm. "Do it," she whispered. "Whatever it takes, save our dream." The engineering team worked with desperate speed, fine-tuning their calculations as the chamber shook around them. Voss watched the readouts with growing dread, knowing that each passing second brought them closer to disaster. "Calculations complete," a human engineer announced, her voice strained. "Initiating overload sequence." As the massive machinery surged to life, Voss cast one last look at the debris barrier. Beyond it, Alara's fate hung in the balance. The chamber filled with a deafening roar as colossal energies built towards their explosive release. Release! Voss braced himself, gripping the console as the chamber began to shake violently. Suddenly, a massive tremor rocked the entire structure. Alarms blared, and emergency lights flashed in angry red. "Status report!" Voss barked into his comm. Taylor's voice crackled through, tense and urgent. "The reactors entered final collapse. We're out of time." In the sealed-off section, Alara stirred. Pain lanced through her body with each labored breath. Radiation burns marring her skin. But her mind remained razor-sharp, focused on one last duty. With trembling hands, she pulled herself to the nearest terminal. Her fingers flew across the interface, inputting complex calculations at lightning speed. Years of experience and intuition guided her movements as she factored in every variable: structural integrity, plasma flow rates, atmospheric conditions. "Transmitting detonation calculations," she gasped into her comm. "Use these for the vent charges." The data streamed from her terminal, racing through the failing network. As the last byte left her system, Alara's comm went dead, severing her final link to the outside world. In the central hub, Voss's team received the transmission. They stared at the incoming data, a mixture of awe and trepidation on their faces. "We can't verify this," a human engineer said, her voice tight with stress. Voss's eyebrows furrowed. "No time. It's Alara's calculations or nothing. Prime those charges." The team sprang into action, inputting Alara's data into the explosive vent charges. As they worked, the chamber's tremors intensified. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. "Charges primed," shouted a Breen warrior. Voss nodded grimly. "Everyone out! Move!" They raced from the central hub, sealing layer after layer of reinforced blast doors behind them. The deafening roar of the failing reactor pursued them through the tunnels. Finally reaching a fortified rally point deeper in the tunnel network, Voss gave the order. "Detonate!" A blinding flash seared through the cracks in the blast doors. The entire world seemed to hold its breath for a fraction of a second before an earth-shattering boom shook the very foundations of Kyrios. The explosive force of the vented plasma surged upward through the access shaft, a tsunami of raw energy. Voss and his team watched the readouts with held breath, praying Alara's calculations would prove true. As the energy signature dissipated in the upper atmosphere, a collective sigh of relief echoed through the tunnels, but their reprieve was short-lived. The destabilized tunnel network began to collapse around them. Supported sections crumbled at an alarming rate, forcing the teams into a frantic evacuation. "Move! Go, go, go!" Voss shouted, urging his people forward. They raced through the maze-like passages, dodging falling debris and leaping over widening fissures in the floor. Behind them, entire sections of tunnel imploded with terrifying finality. A group of human and Breen soldiers brought up the rear, ensuring no one was left behind. As they approached a main egress passage, a sickening rumble filled the air. "Look out!" a Breen warrior cried, but it was too late. The passage collapsed in a thunderous avalanche of rock and metal. Voss watched in horror as the dust settled, revealing a solid wall of debris where his comrades had stood moments before. "No!" he roared, pounding his fist against the impassable barrier. But there was no time for grief or rescue attempts. The tunnels continued to fail around them. With heavy hearts, the surviving team members pressed on, finally emerging into the chaos-filled streets of Kyrios. The city they had fought so hard to save now lay in ruins, the scars of battle etched into its very foundations. Voss's comm crackled to life, Taylor's voice cutting through the din of ongoing combat. "Captain, what's your status?" As Voss began his report, his eyes scanned the devastated landscape. In the distance, plasma bolts crisscrossed the sky as Taylor's forces engaged in fierce urban combat with Sorvix's remaining fanatics. The battle for Kyrios was just getting started, but the reactor's threat had been neutralized. At what cost, Voss wondered, his thoughts turning to Alara and the brave souls lost in the tunnels below. In the shattered heart of the city, human and Breen alike fought side by side, united by a shared purpose born from crisis. It was a unity forged in fire, tested by sacrifice, and now faced with the monumental task of rebuilding from the ashes of near disaster.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.